Dr. Jazz.
Hey guys,
Dr.
Samo here.
Jazz.
Thanks for checking out the channel and its contents. And if you feel like it, please do subscribe. Thanks so much. Enjoy the video. Bye. Man, thanks for finding the time. Appreciate it.
That's my pleasure as well. So good.
I saw in Maribor. You were last year here in Maribor, in my hometown, with Trevor, and I couldn't make it to the gig, but I saw you guys like the first time you were here, which must have been like 15 years ago, and I love the trio, the Eternal Triangle, man. So beautiful.
Oh, right. Gosh. Well, it couldn't have been 15 years ago.
Or 10 maybe. 10 maybe.
No, I mean, we kind of came, we came to be in existence as a result of the pandemic.
Ah, then it was some other band I saw you.
Yeah.
I forgot which it was. Yeah, it's but it was with Trevor. It was with Trevor, I think. So must have been.
Oh yes, I've worked with Trevor for many years.
Yeah.
As a duo, we've worked in. I think I first met him when in the late 1960s, when I was still in my as a teenager, and he was actually performing with the Spontaneous Music Ensemble at a club in London, in central London, called the Little Theatre Club.
Oh yeah, sure.
And which, as it happens, was kind of came into existence for improvised music as a result of my sister, who was working with John Stevens at the time, playing, yes, that's it, drummer, and she was a what they used to call a crooner. So she used to be singing kind of rather schmaltzy type songs and whatever else in gambling casinos and stuff. And John Stevens was the drummer.
Really? Oh my God. Can't imagine that. Okay.
And John Stevens said to her, in a conversation just in passing, he said, I'm looking to kind of explore music that I've been working with Trevor on over the years when we were both in the Royal Air Force together, studying music, because at that period of time, it was very difficult for a working class person in this country to get an education, a free education in music. So people used to get into the forces in order to study music in either the army or the Air Force. And they both met each other in the Air Force. So Trevor knew John. John actually got this nightclub gig at the Little Theatre Club as a result of my sister doing something else with a band called The Scaffold, who are a kind of a sort of performing arts group. Yeah, so that was the connection, and that's how I met Trevor right at the beginning of my work, my so-called career in music.
Come on. Oh, Veryan, can you just put your camera a little bit below so that I see your whole?
Okay. You mean cap?
Yeah. Oh, yes. Perfect.
Is that better?
Yeah. Better.
Okay.
Perfect. Good. Yeah. Since you mentioned the 70s, I wanted to ask you, you have such a wide scope. I've done this talk with so many guys from the UK scene, from Phil Minton to the piano player Steve Beresford, and all these guys who were part of this Barry guy, immense creative community that was going on in the 70s. How did you get to know the improvised language? I mean, how did you become familiar with it? Because back then already, all these guys were playing. Howard Riley was playing, Barry guy was already playing, Dave Holland was still in the improvised scene. Kenny Wheeler was there, all these incredible guys.
Yeah, absolutely, playing with the SME and stuff. Well, as I said, my sister, who was friends not only with John Stevens but with John Stevens's wife Anne, they managed to get their foot in the door at this club, which was a very small club. You had to go up many flights of stairs, and so it became a regular kind of haunt for, you know, first and second generation improvisers. I would call myself a second generation improviser, and the same thing with Steve Beresford and all the other people who used to go up there. And the first generation lot were basically two different kind of areas of improvised music. One was the area of improvised music that was essentially coming from sort of free jazz, and what was going on in that period of time, which was sort of post John Coltrane and the Albert Ayler sort of aesthetic. And the other one was the more of the European aesthetic, which was kind of being explored by people like AMM, Keith Rowe and Eddie Prevost and Cornelius Cardew. They were all doing various kind of sort of activities, but they were coexisting quite, you know, with no animosity at all. There was possibly a bit of healthy rivalry or whatever, but it was kind of like that was the way things were evolving, and I think also even John Stevens was beginning to kind of explore the aesthetic of you know, the post-war modernist aesthetic that was being kind of generated in Germany, actually, of all places. You know, Germany weren't allowed to spend money on building their defense again because of having gone through the Second World War, and so there was money going into the arts in Germany. The evolution of Darmstadt and modernism and you know, people like Stockhouse and who came from sort of people like Webern and you know, so there was that area of that sound world that I think even, for instance, John Stevens was beginning to feel was an interesting kind of area of exploration for even the likes of the SME and stuff. And so that was basically an attempt at answering your question. That was that's the way I was seeing it. I mean, I kind of I did the standard sort of musical education, much against my own father's wishes, because of the fact that you know, he'd spent 6 years, you know, fighting in the war, and you know, he had quite a tough time, but felt that in some ways it was much more important for me to sort of get a real job, you know, being and so I had to spend a lot of time sort of trying to convince him that music had a value, and I think possibly he really didn't understand, you know, jazz and, you know, what that was about so much. I remember later on in his life, he came to hear me play at Ronnie Scott's when I was nominated a young jazz musician of 1979, and there was even a piece of music that the guitarist in our band that we were playing with, called Gary Peters, said this next piece we're going to play is dedicated to Squaddy, and Squaddy was my father's nickname, sort of military nickname, and he was quite chuffed that his name had been mentioned in Ronnie Scott's, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, so
Very interesting.
that was basically how things were evolving, really, and
Yeah.
you know, my own education. I had to kind of like find my own kind of course and furrow in a lot of ways, because you know, I was interested in all the stuff that was going on at the little theatre club, and with John Stevens and
Yeah.
John. I used to do a few things. I used to attend some of John's workshops, and I used to occasionally do some of the pieces that he uses in a book called Search and Reflect, and you know, take part in some of the vocal stuff. Used to sing a little bit, and I knew quite a lot of the musicians who were involved with him at that time, one of whom was Trevor.
Yeah.
And I think in a lot of ways at that time also, Trevor had to kind of find a way of find his own voice and find his own area and interests in music. So he also moved away from London as well. Trevor went to live in another town about 50 miles south of London on the coast, and and it was at that time that he started this group called Moiré Music.
Yeah, yeah. That's when it really picked up, right? For you
Yes.
guys. Yeah.
And in fact, we're talking about your lovely country, which it is. You know, it's fantastically beautiful country, but with all the woods and greenery and everything. But there was a time when we played in Ljubljana, I think.
I know, on Druga Godba, the festival. That was like
Yes.
89. That was last year of Yugoslavia, or one before.
It was
Yeah,
around about a time that things kicked off, wasn't it?
yeah. How was that concert like? I mean, how was the vibe like? I'm really curious.
Yeah. And I remember somebody saying, yeah, there was also the revolution in Slovenia, and only one shot was ever fired.
Yeah, like almost like that it went, really.
Yeah.
We finished it in 12 days, luckily. I mean, considering
luckily, yes.
how things went south, you know.
Yeah, so I mean, I've been back to Ljubljana once or twice. With Trevor, we played in a kind of like a club right at the top of the building.
Sankaredom, yeah, sure. I know it.
Yes.
Yeah,
we did a our dialogues project there. And of course, I know David Braun.
Sure, he's a friend of mine. Yeah, he's a promoter here in Maribor. I've known him for 30 years. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
He's a very special person.
Yeah, he's the first guy who gave me actually the stuff you did with Trevor. The albums, and I know I made, you know, copies of CDRs back then. You know, that's how you explore music. So, and I remember I was like, man, what is this? I really loved it. You know, the African rhythms and how you guys arranged it, yet still kept it really open. And
that's right. And I think in some respects, Eternal Triangle continues that kind of methodology in a lot of ways, that process. I think in some ways, I would say that my own input into what we're doing now, I think there's a tiny bit more autonomy when it comes to the actual construction of the music in Eternal Triangle as opposed to Moiré Music. Trevor was having to deal with, you know, handfuls of younger musicians who you know, quite often challenged him and asked questions and stuff like that. And so he had to kind of, in some ways, be quite specific about the way the pieces were going to be played, etc., a little bit, so that, and, you know, we used to rehearse quite a lot. And it was a particularly good learning experience, you know, working with African musicians who you know, people. There was the one of the percussionists who was in Moiré music was a guy called Nana Tsibo, and he spent many years working with Trevor. And Nana died, I suppose, about three or 4 years ago now, in the same town as where Trevor is living, Hastings. And I'd done a few things with Nana, and you know, independently of Moiré music as well. And Nana had a fantastic feel for rhythm, which was kind of quite different from some of the other feels that the West African musicians brought. Nana had a very kind of soft feel, and very supple, and not you know, I think possibly, you know, in African music, a lot depends on the mentality of the tribes, and sure. You know, like the rhythmic feel, say, of the Ewe people is very different from, say, for instance, some of the more kind of internal peoples in Ghana, like the Fante people. Yeah. And I think and the Shanties, and I think the Fantes. I remember talking to Nana about this, and Nana saying that his particular group of people, his tribe, were very culturally eclectic, and so therefore they had the best of many different worlds around them, and so therefore his own kind of feel reflected that, which was very laid back, and you know, I spent quite a lot of time getting a lot of inspiration from people like Ku Nemo and people like that, who were playing palm wine music. And I think Nana again used quite a lot of the rhythmic cycles and stuff from that particular activity, the palm wine music, the smaller groups, you know, that involved like acoustic guitars and harmony vocals and stuff. It was very beautiful, very beautiful.
Yeah. How did you guys decide to do this project, actually? Because, you know, you were quite involved in the improvised scene before.
Yes.
And then this comes and it's like a...
Yes.
I think...
That's right. I think in some ways, in many ways, there was a kind of... well, I don't think it's related to, you know, this idea of what postmodernism is about. You know, I don't like to use these kind of labels and tags.
Yeah.
But always with a movement like, for instance, say, for instance, yes, contemporary improvised music, and the cultural sort of baggage connected with the processes of playing and the language that is being played. It has quite a lot of sort of unspoken doctrines, if you like, you know, and patterns of behavior and protocols that in some ways has its own defining power, but also has its own restricting power, insofar as you know, in order to kind of qualify sometimes the, you know, your interactions and whatever you're doing with those people, you know, I think that in some ways there are things that lie outside it that you say, well, why can't I include some of these ideas, or
Absolutely.
why can't we talk about these ideas? And what, you know, it makes you ask a few questions. It makes you also ask questions that I have been interested in asking. And I think at the time with Trevor and John, you know, was very kind of like involved in improvised music and finding a specific language, those things like So What Do You Think, and Carrie Obin, and and the stuff that he did right at the end of his life, which included working with John Butcher and the Roger Smith, the guitarist. I mean, yourself being a guitarist, a little bit about Roger. So, and I think Trevor wanted to sort of explore other areas. He involved Keith Rowe with Amalgam, and doing things like that, which was kind of like strangely, wonderfully awkward cross-fertilizations that got Keith Rowe doing things that he wasn't used to doing, and Trevor also having to accommodate what Keith Rowe was doing. So that, I think, in a lot of ways, that's I think it's healthy doing those sorts of things as well, So I don't kind of exclude myself to being a sort of an improvising musician purist, so to speak. I've kind of one of the things I did, for instance, a long time ago, at the end of the last millennium, was kind of get into a kind of artists' colony, which is why I'm here living in Welwyn Garden City. And the colony was just on the other side of town, and we moved up here, and it was called the Digswell Arts Trust. And they had there was an electronics composer there who kind of was fresh out of Cambridge University and stuff, but nobody else. But the administrator had heard John Coltrane live in London, and he'd also heard Ornette Coleman and various people, and so he was keen. When my wife applied for us to go to Diggs to be part of the Digswell Arts Trust, Bill Parkinson kind of thought, wow, this is going to be interesting. Let's try and get this guy to come and work for the Digswell Arts Trust. And he went at the interview. I was asked sort of what I would like to do, and I said, well, I'd like to kind of obviously try and involve local musicians, do workshops that involving improvisations, but also carry on sort of developing and writing a book about certain ideas that I was working on musically. And so when I had the audition and stuff like that, which was just an interview basically, and I gave them loads of cassettes that they listened to and were kind of all the artists, and were completely bemused by it and didn't really understand what was going on. They sort of said to the administrator, listen, we don't feel that we have any kind of power or strength to make a decision about whether this person can come and live here or not. So they said, well, why don't we ask somebody who's very established in the jazz world in England? And fortunately, about 2 weeks before I had this interview, I thought that I'd go and have a lesson with this pianist called Stan Tracy, who was Stan had played quite a lot as the house pianist at Ronnie Scott's.
Yeah.
He was one of I think he was one of Sonny Rollins's favorite pianists in England, and I think he also worked with people like Roland Kirk, and he was anyway. So, and he lived about sort of a mile away from me in
Oh.
London. So I kind of rung, and I remember he sort of said, yes, all right, you can come. And I asked him how much it would cost. And he said £4.50. And I thought, £4.50, that's a hell of a lot of money, but I'll do it anyway. So I went and had this lesson with him, and he played a very nice. I remember he played a very nice version of Around Midnight, which went all around midnight, so to speak. And then at the end, I said my goodbyes to him and stuff. 2 weeks later, they got a call from the Digswell. Stan Tracy got a call from the Digswell Arts Trust saying, "What's this guy Veryan Weston like?" And Stan, fortunately, remembered the lessons, so he said, "Oh, he's great. He's good, you know." So I was very lucky to get in. And when I got to Digswell, I did continue research, and I researched the actual musical material that interested me, which were pentatonic scales. So, and I'm interested in kind of how specific scales relate to one another, specific pentatonic scales, how they move and modulate, and how they connect and relate to each other within I suppose the Greek modal system, but you can apply them in many different ways as well. I mean, pentatonic scales that are used in a single kind of entities in parts of the world, specifically as one pentatonic scale, they're often more tuned to the natural overtone series than of course the compromised pentatonic scales that we are forced to play in equal temperament, so to speak. But yeah,
interesting.
So yes, that's my and I'm interested in in the eternal triangle. The reason why I suggested to Trevor that we call ourselves Eternal Triangle is if I lift up this laptop and point it out of the window, you can see in the garden there, Samo, a geodesic dome. And during the pandemic, I had very little to do, and the weather, I don't know if you had weather in where you are, but the weather here in England was absolutely wonderful. And so I thought I'd build a geodesic dome and explore the pentagrammic nature and hexagrammic nature of triangles and how they relate to one another. So it was all happening at that time, yeah.
Quite a project, man.
Quite a project.
Quite a project. I wanted to ask you also about prior to Trevor, the Moira music that you did. Like there are so many albums you did with Lol, Coxhill, and also then you connected with Phil Minton, who are both such important parts of the UK improvised scene. Like how did those stories happen? Did you all like kind of connect, I guess, right?
Yeah, both those people are kind of enormously important in my life. Lol actually came to live at Digswell.
Ah, okay.
And he came to Digswell as well. And at that time, I was kind of just I was just working with a few people, a few local musicians and stuff, and getting to know them. And then Lol came and lived there. And I think one of my first concerts that I did outside, in England was in Brighton. And it was with Harry Miller, the bass player, Mark Sharrig. I was thinking of Mark Sharrig recently because I was reading some of his Facebook material. Lol, of course, and a drummer called Alan Jackson. and I can't remember how. I think it was improvised, completely improvised. It might have had a few kind of ideas, a few kind of sort of modal ideas or riffs and stuff. But Lol, again, you know, his he had a fantastic ability to improvise, and also his kind of involvement came from a deep love and respect for bebop. And he was a, you know, he was a keen fan of people like Bruce Turner and who he knew and worked with, and also you know, people like obviously Charlie Parker and and Lol and I actually played a few projects which involved us playing Parker tunes and stuff, and also with Stuart Hall, who was a guitarist, a multi-instrumentalist really, who was working at Middlesex University at the time, and we did used to play in a trio called Standard Conversion, which was about converting standards in the way Lol liked to convert them.
Yeah.
And but yes, he was enormously helpful as a person. He was, I suppose he was around 20 years older.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so he was an incredibly important mentor for me emotionally, and you know, as a human being. You know, I kind of, he was also extremely tolerant of me, so to speak. You know, he was understanding, and wouldn't he never really chastised me, but he used to just go silent, if you see what and I could tell that there was something going on, or he'd bring it round later and kind of turn it round into a little bit of gentle mockery, which was designed for me to learn from. Well, it was
that's a good way. Yeah.
But he was great, and also Lol played in Moray Music, as you said, and also so did Phil Minton. In fact, I met Phil in Moray Music. Trevor had 3 singers at one time when we did something in Zurich. One of the first things we did, in fact, which involved Penise Saul, who was South African, and Phil, and I think it was Maggie Nichols as well. So we had 3 singers, and there was Paul Rutherford in the band as well. I remember after the concert, nobody went to sleep. We went straight to the airport, you know, in a very dazed manner. But yes. So yeah, and Phil, I think Phil and I kind of hung out in Salfaldem on another occasion a little bit later, where we'd done the festival there.
Yeah.
And it was that was also a sort of biggish group, which involved, as I say, Phil and Maggie. And I remember there were some other musicians like James Blood Ulmer was playing there that year and stuff. And Phil sort of said that he'd had a conversation with a guy who was able to whistle Schubert songs, you know, and he was impressed with his kind of intonation and his knowledge to be able to do that while also drinking a lot of beer at a bar, you know. So Phil thought that it would be an interesting project to actually pick and choose sort of songs that you genuinely liked, that didn't necessarily only adhere to one particular strand of aesthetic. Like, for instance, it doesn't have to be Schubert, but we did do Andy music, and we did some Schumann, and we did some Elvis we did the Lieber und Stoller Jailhouse Rock and things like that. So yeah, that, and also some larger project involving a choir.
Choir, yeah, he did a lot of those, yeah.
There's Songs from a Prison Diary, which was based around poems written by Ho Chi Minh when he was in a Chinese prison.
Yeah, it's like early 90s, yeah, that one.
Yes.
I remember, yeah.
Yeah. And yes, and a few other things as well, on a thing based around the life and times of Nestor Makhno, who was a Russian anarchist during the kind of the Russian Revolution, who was basically betrayed by Trotsky and driven out of Russia, I think. I don't know if he was actually driven out, but he was driven under by Russia. But yeah, yes. So Phil is another kind of very important person in my life, and we spent a lot of times doing a lot of work. We occasionally meet up at the London Improvisers Orchestra concerts, and we have a drink and catch up on news. And I've been down to see him since he's moved house, and he's living now in a very nice part of England called Bath, down in Somerset.
Oh yeah.
And he sort of said to me, he said he thought we'd been quite lucky for the period of time that we were working together, because there was so much more opportunities to work then.
Yeah.
And since I think Europe, generally speaking, has really changed a lot. When I was starting to work with LOL, for instance, there was quite a lot of work in France, and they going to this little place called Chantenay de Ville 2, where LOL and myself and Stuart Hall did a project called the Inimitable LOL Coxhill, and doing concerts in France and with Moiré Music as well. We played in Angoulême, I remember, at a festival opposite Steve Lacy and stuff like that. And generally speaking, and there were places like all the little towns and cities, or quite a lot of them, had these things called Maison de la Cultures,
Yep.
And but I spoke to Joan Leandro at the BIM on one of the last gigs I did at the BIM house, and she sort of said it's completely dried up in France. It's like very, very difficult to,
especially after COVID, even worse, I think.
Yeah, it's not easy. So, and generally speaking, that's the same all over Europe, really.
Yeah.
But who knows what's going to happen? We have to just keep going, don't we?
Absolutely. Which leads me to one question. Like, I listened today to Crossings with Hannah and Mark.
Oh,
and I
with
love
Mark.
That's such a good album, because it's like, it's so groovy. On the other hand, it's so open. And I wanted to ask you, like, have you been pursuing still that trio, or like what's been going on like band leading department? I mean, all of these things are more or less collectives, but still, like,
yes.
What have you been working on lately? Like,
yeah, that's nice that you said that. And in actual fact, I'm very I'm very pleased to hear that you said that, because I don't there weren't that many CDs made by Nick Dart, and he did sort of put out a few and stuff, and I don't think it's available on Spotify rather than Bandcamp.
Yeah,
which I would like to change to Bandcamp, I think, in a lot of ways. I don't like Spotify, and I don't like what they represent and stand for.
I know, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that particular group, I mean, Mark recently has become the recipient of a really fantastic um, award, along with Rachel Musson, and they got from Paul Hamlin, and he's doing a lot of work now, working in a lot of really interesting projects, and he's a lovely person and
Yeah, he's a really nice
drummer.
guy. Yeah.
And you know, the one of my favorite groups that I played with involved him and John Edwards.
Oh, sure, they're like this. Yeah, they're
Yes.
amazing. Yeah, together.
Yeah, and in actual fact, I played. I had this kind of like early morning wakeful patch many decades ago, thinking that those two would work very well together, and I'd like to kind of involve them, and that I didn't know that they already did. And the other thing was this was before they became a kind of fixture, and from other musicians, I think, like for instance, we put out Mercury Concert. I think before anybody else was working with them as a kind of fixture, and it was, I think, a very nice. It had a very good chemistry.
Yeah, absolutely.
But going back to what you're saying about the thing with Mark and Hannah, so Mark is pretty busy. Hannah has kind of I've been meaning to contact her because she lives on a boat.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, it's a narrow boat on a canal.
Yeah.
And she was moving in and around London for, I suppose, a good sort of 5-6 years, and then got the opportunity to go right up into a place halfway between here and Birmingham, I think, and it's in the middle of the country. And she's actually in England. What you can do is you have to, if you have a narrowboat, you can only stay there for a certain period of time, and then you have to move the mooring. So they force you to be nomadic unless you buy a mooring. And if you buy a mooring, you actually then buy a small area of land which is right by the canal. And Hannah's found herself in a very beautiful part of England, so I imagine. She says it's good, but it needs a lot of work because it's actually the size of a little garden as well.
Yeah.
So she's got her narrowboat now next to a little garden, and it's quite a long way from here. And the last time I think I saw her was not this Christmas, but the last Christmas. So sadly, again, we've lost touch. And you asking that question, she's been also very, very generous with her own kind of support and pliability to kind of learn somebody else's ideas, which they were basically these were my ideas. They were based around what I call tessellations, which are basically also the research I did into pentatonic scales and how they work together. So, and how you can move from one to the other.
Yeah.
And that was an example of something where I found some pieces of music that also somehow tied up with this strange. I bought a thing called an M Audio, which is just like it's a really short keyboard. I think it was about 60 keys on it, and it's basically not. It's only a trigger. It's a trigger system. It's a digital trigger system. So you have to plug it into some form of sound module. And so I bought from a man in Basingstoke railway station car park I bought this old what do they call them? A sound module.
Yeah.
And the sound module had sort of a MIDI. I think it was 100. I think that they had a specific number of sounds ending at the end with sort of like helicopter, telephone, and audience.
Yeah.
You know?
I know those.
And
Yeah.
all the other stuff. Most of it was rubbish, but there were one or two which were really nice. And I kind of like thought, well, it would be quite nice to kind of do something with the ethnic sound of it, you know, like for instance the thumb piano, or
Yeah.
you know, and just play with it a little bit and see if I can find some rhythmic ideas that somehow reflect that, and also the backer one, which is, you know, there are allusions, if you like, to kind of the singing, the way the backer people sing,
Yeah.
which again uses a really interesting pentatonic scale, which is not part of the Greek modal system, but it's one that was used, I think, probably primarily initially by people like Debussy, which is what is based on the overtone series. So in other words, it's anhemitonic insofar as it doesn't have semitones in it.
Yeah.
But say, for instance, you have a pentatonic scale which goes A, C, D, E, G.
Mm-hmm.
Then what you do is you put the G down to an F sharp. So it's A, C, D, E, G, F sharp, or G flat. And that is also the first different 5 notes of the overtone series.
Interesting.
So that's how it's built. And it doesn't actually fit with the Kumoi or the Hirayoshi or any of the other ones, the Indian, the Raga Yog, Indian pentatonic and stuff like that. It's completely different. But yeah, these scales always really interest me a lot. Just very quickly, when I just come back from a lovely sort of holiday that was in the Netherlands, where I saw my son and my daughter was over from Canada, and with her 3 children, my son with his 2 children. So it was a nice big house full of people. But then it snowed. I don't know whether you had a lot of...
My wife is from Holland, so we were in Holland in December.
Oh,
It was crazy, and here it also snowed. We have like half a meter of snow. It was like
it was bizarre, wasn't it?
crazy. It was crazy.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so you know, great. Well, we were kind of like, my daughter was off to the airport in Schiphol,
Yeah.
and sort of we bid our farewells. But basically, the train going to Schiphol actually stopped at Amsterdam South and said, "I'm sorry, but we can't go any further."
I've heard stories. Yeah.
It was ridiculous. And so basically we stayed a little bit of extra time, and I am going to get round to this particular pentatonic scale in a moment. But what happened was that we stopped and were forced to kind of stay in a hotel for over 2 days in this very nice hotel. It's called the Volks Hotel in near the south of Amsterdam, because it was the only place that, and Eurostar had a budget for anybody which we're still trying to claim money for. But it had, not only did it have quite an interesting jacuzzi, which was on the roof of the hotel in the open. So we enjoyed going up there in snowstorms.
Ooh, yeah.
in darkness, and as well with these kind of slow snow blizzards, and having a jacuzzi, and then somehow getting to the sauna, which was about 30 feet away, having to walk across ice and stuff. It was kind of like very bizarre and surreal. But on one occasion I heard this fantastic piece of music in the bar, and I retraced it and found it yesterday, and I heard it round at my son's house as well. He had a kind of record. It was one of those Ethiopian guys playing the saxophone, and with I think it's an old recording, and the tenor saxophone player is absolutely beautiful. Really, just he only plays those pentatonic notes. And basically the pentatonic scale is the Hirayoshi scale, which is a Japanese scale. So you get these kind of isolated scales from different parts of the world where they stay on them. And I think the Ethiopian scale is used a lot. That Hirayoshi scale is used a lot. This particular one doesn't use the Hirayoshi scale. It just uses the common one. But anyway, yeah, that's why I sort of brought this back to the experience of hearing the music in the bar and stuff.
Yeah,
we haven't obviously listened or talked about music, and I must say I've listened to your music and like it very much as well. You've got some very nice things with a pianist who you play with.
I've done a lot of stuff. I mean, I've done a lot from composed to improvised. I really like different
different things. It's very nice.
Thank
you.
Very,
very, very beautiful, actually.
Would be nice to play one day, man. Like, if you ever make it here to Slovenia, we have a guest room here. I have a piano here, so you're kindly invited. So
absolutely, I would love to.
Would be beautiful.
It would be great. I'm sure we'd find lots of music.
Oh man, I think it would be nice to chat like over a nice glass of wine and just just spend the evening chatting and stuff like that. So beautiful.
Yes, and definitely. Well, let's think about it.
Yeah, and if you're going to be in the area in the Central Europe, just drop me a line. I'm like 30 minutes south of Graz, so just that you know, kind of. I mean, you've
30 minutes outside of Graz.
Yeah, like in Maribor. I live in Maribor, so I mean, you've been in Maribor like 2 times or 3 times already. So if you're going to be in the area, just drop me a line in advance, and we can get together something.
Yeah, because funnily enough, actually, I know Graz a little bit.
Yeah.
From the jazz academy there.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, there's a nice singer who got in touch with me and asked me to do something with some of her students. She's called Annette Gieseriegel.
Don't know her.
She's a singer who lives, I think, in Graz, and I did something. Funnily enough, I did something with 8 singers, which again is a pentatonic thing. I don't know if do you know my Weebly website?
Probably yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I checked your website. Yeah.
Yeah. On the Weebly website, there is a page which I've called tessellations or research. I think I go research and then tessellation.
I'll check it out.
And then on the tessellation scale side, I think I've done now, I think 5 tessellations pieces that are different each time. And one of them was with these singers from Graz, actually.
Okay, I'll check it out. Wow.
The significant, I always remember the period of time that we did it was because on the day of the first rehearsal, I got to Stansted Airport in order to get on an aeroplane, and was told that there had been a volcanic eruption in Iceland, and that the whole of the air system in the
I remember that.
You remember?
I had a gig in Prague. That's it. And we couldn't get back home, so we rented a car and drove the last car we got, because all the cars, everything was taken. So we were driving like a semi truck van to come home. That was I remember these. Man.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, yes, my journey, basically, I remember coming back from Stansted Airport and giving the meteorological office a ring
Yeah.
in England, you know, UK Meteorological Office, and I said, could I speak to somebody who knows a little bit about you know, volcanic eruptions? And I did manage to get. I said, so how long do you think we're going to have to wait until we can fly again? He said, well, maybe 2 or 3 weeks. And I thought, geez, so. Then I went down to the Eurostar, and there was a queue all the way from Euston to King's Cross. So I couldn't do that. And so I ended up catching a train to Dover, and then getting on a ferry, passenger ferry, and getting across to Calais that night, and sleeping in the same room as this kind of very helpful and obliging Russian woman who was going to meet her husband somewhere in Europe. And I remember we shared a bottle of Beaujolais together and went to sleep. And then I went to I went to Paris the next day to try and get a train, and the guy sort of just shook his head. And then I saw somebody getting something out of a ticket machine and said, where are you going? And he said, well, I'm going to Saarbrücken. So I said, that sounds German. So
yeah, that's across the border.
Yeah. So I said, can you get me one as well? He said, well, it's going in 3 minutes. I said, yeah, go on then, hurry. And so I kind of followed him, a young student he was, and got on the train. And when I was on the train to Saarbrücken, I said, well, where does this train end up? He said, Munich. So I said, well, can I stay on it? And, you know, like in England, if you stay on a train, you get fined for not having the proper ticket. But there they sort of said, well, yeah, of course, yeah, we'll sell you a ticket. And so I bought a ticket to Munich. And then from Munich, I went from Munich, I think, to Vienna, and then Vienna to Graz. And I made it that night. So I missed a day rehearsal. So yeah,
amazing, man.
It was quite a strange time, wasn't it?
Oh man,
Yeah,
bizarre. Like
yeah.